Good morning. It's such a great pleasure to be here. I'm honored and deeply feel the love, the welcome, and this is such a great opportunity. Unfortunately, I'm trying to defy technology by having handwritten notes, so forgive me for that. And we're here to talk about compassion. The title of this lecture is The Art of Being. But before I talk about compassion, I really wanted to pose a couple questions. It's really more of a discussion of this topic. And what I wanted to present first is that the idea that leaders of all world religions have affirmed, in fact, that compassion and the golden rule are fundamental principles that are integral to every religion. So we know the golden rule, do unto others as you want them do unto you. And we thought about this theme and we asked a first question: is this enough? And if this is enough, have we talked about this topic in relationship to, is it religion, right? The greatest religious leaders talked about compassion and the golden rule. But is this truly a religion's issue, or it's a nature? Religion versus nature. So let's delve into that a little bit, and this is just a little bit of time for us to talk and think about it, all right? So first and foremost is to understand that there are examples of compassion everywhere. So compassion, love, sympathy, and those examples actually existed even before there were Homo sapiens around. Compassion existed before we existed, right? So let's talk about 3 examples, and the first one is actually called kin selection. So in that is defined, kin selection is just how animals help each other through compassion. Where do we see kin selection? Well, let's think in terms of wolves, right? They're the group, and they help each other. They will wait until the weak one is passed before they leave, and they have a sense of compassion, of helping the one that's suffering, that is ill, that is old or too young, and by that they display a sense of compassion. That animal behavior is a way for us to think that very, very good thought process, that it's in our genes. Compassion is actually genetically encoded into all of us, animal and humans. So this is good news. Let's not forget that, unfortunately, the other side of the good news is that kin selection is really myopic. I only display compassion to my own family, right? So a lion den have compassion only to themselves, not to the poor gazelle or whatever else is out there. So that's the first level of compassion that we see in nature. Good news, not so good news. The other level of compassion that's observed, which is better news for us, it's called reciprocal altruism. And we see that in animals, but mostly we see in humans. And reciprocal altruism is simply said how we do things to other people because we want them to do good things for us. It's very simple. I do good things, but it's really motivated by the inherent need which is self-serving, right? It's really very low level at that point. And biologically speaking, it's great because we're here we have our innate need to survive. Therefore, even if we don't believe in certain things or we don't feel it, we are sometimes compassionate, even if self-serving. Cool? The good thing, it's at a higher level. The bad thing is that type of reciprocal altruism is only confined to your close community, right? To your family. Who here has not had an issue with a family member and you just, but I need them. Therefore, I'll be compassionate to them when they need, or even friends, or even at a work environment. The bad news, it's not at the level that we want us to be, to fully live as God, as Jesus wants us to live. So from a Darwinian perspective, this is also found genetically encoded, this type of compassion, that display of compassion. It's in us naturally. We don't need to go to church. We don't need to even believe in anything, and it's all here. So this is good stuff. It's good news. If we want to be treated well, we treat well. Golden rule again, right? The third level, which is really the question that we're here to talk about, is, are we born with a built-in capacity for the third level compassion, which is universal compassion? And that's what I want us all to think about it. Yes or no?
Yes.
Who here wants to go to prison? Honestly, who here wants to go to jail? Right? None of us. Yet, if we see somebody who has committed a crime, do you want that person to go to jail? I do, right? So the question then becomes, are we universally compassionate, or only to those that we judge need compassion? This is where we start getting really crazy in the concept, right? Do we want to treat them differently than we are treated? Do we also feel that we are error-free? Have we never committed a mistake? No, none of us. We're all imperfect. Therefore, the whole concept of I have immense mercy to myself, because I have all my rationalizations. I know that I made a mistake, but I really didn't mean to do it, etc. Versus the immediate value judgment on the other that may be committing the same mistakes. And we're not saying here, giving an apology to not put people to prison. This is just an example of how we think of ourselves differently than other people. So, the question becomes, are we really prepared to give that sense of universal compassion? And where do we see that type of compassion?
Jesus.
Yeah. Our benefactors, God, Jesus. It's in the realm of the suprahuman, the angelical state. That the good news is that we're all going to be there one time. We're still very fallible. But in looking into animal and self-serving and universal compassion, we need to think of ourselves where we want to be at. Do we want to gravitate into, I'm being really good about my kids and my family, right? Or I'm really good to those that can be good to me because if I work with them. Or do we want to really start to gravitate toward that compassion to anyone out there? Even and most especially those who do not think like us, those who do not behave like us. not like our children, not like our friends, not like those who are part of my community. And that's when you start to behaving more godlike. So, this question is here simply to remind us that we should have that sense of decision making on how to be compassionate at every step of our lives, at every moment of our lives, to think twice. What am I? Am I being just this that genetically has been encoded to me, or am I being more than that? So with that, we start talking about the idea of us, right? And Teresa heard about this, the other, and the other head that is thought about as our enemy. And I'm going to bring a cliche example because it's easier for us, and my apologies if I'm offensive to anyone, but we're going through decades long war with a certain region of the world, right? So the example is, let's think the Middle East, somewhere in the Middle East where there is a war, and we see somebody burning a flag. It happens. What is our immediate response to that? It's disrespect and even anger, right? But what has driven that person, community, nation, and even geographical region to act with such anger? Terrorist acts. And until we start to look at them not as them, but as us, we won't be able to truly be compassionate toward them, especially when their acts are destructive, disrespectful, and deeply hurting our sense of who we are, our identity. Okay? Compassion, discussion, put aside. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about game theory. Who here knows about game theory? It's often discussed in the economic field, but game theory is very simply put, it's a zero-sum game. In sports, right? If one wins, the other loses, a zero-sum. So 1 minus 1 equals 0. Cool? Interesting enough, as our world have become much more globalized, much more interdependent, we have developed in a very high level the sense of non-zero-sum game. So examples of that is, if I'm a farmer and I have extra eggs, I have a merchandise, and Marcelo has money and he has a demand. Zero sum, win-win, we both win, right? Interesting enough, and we're in an interesting paradigm right now, politically, globally speaking, but let's pretend we're not going through what we're going through. But up until very recent, historically speaking, politically speaking, as we become much more interdependent, we have become a society of non-zero sumness. A society that is impossible to think historically where everybody must win and nobody loses. So there's never a zero sum. So from that perspective, we understand that and I call it the recent old world of non-zero sumness, is the realization that if one loses, everybody loses. So let's think about maybe 7 years ago, right? 10 years ago, what happened to our economy? The bubble, we crashed, banking organizations crashed, and what did we do? All of us All of the taxpayers got together to make it back, because if one system fails, everybody else fails. Greece failed, we rescued, and we kept doing those things because we knew that we are interdependent. That's kind of the level 2 compassion, isn't it? At a macro level, it's self-serving, but we need to help, even if I hate the fact that, and I'm playing here, that Greece did not do a good job in savings and all this. But we are helping because we have to. And interesting is that at this point, we found that this non-zero sumness reality, if it's sustainable and moves to a different level, leads it to a moral attitude of forgiveness and compassion on an universal level. And our paradigm now is for us to think, how do we do that? Right? And we're right in between two worlds, the until now and what's coming up, which I don't know what that is, in fact. And I say that because this interdependency led to a backlash that we're seeing, we're witnessing. France, the Netherlands, Brazil, US, every well-developed nation is going through this backlash. I cannot keep bailing you, right? And we're seeing something that's going to be very interesting, and we all are witnessing this. We cannot know what's going to happen. I believe this is what we need to understand, that now we're going to move into the self-serving compassion, to the true compassion, the angel, this is my term, the angel compassion, the universal compassion, where we are good, not because if I'm not good, I suffer, but I'm good to you because I see you suffering and you're hurting, and I cannot not help you. Make sense? We saw some of that historically, rather recent. And by recent, I talk about maybe 50 years ago. World War II, after the aftermath of World War II, we saw a lot of that, where, let's say, the nuclear bombs and the Japanese, and now we see a quite large Japanese-American population, so we see that acceptance even in the face or after the face of incredible cruelty or decision-making. We saw later with the European community, which is such a great example, and it's falling apart, I'm so sorry, but where Germany attacked France and did unthinkable things, and European community came with the idea that it's not about economics, it's about avoiding doing the same mistake again. Hence, France leads the economic decisions of the European community, and Germany leads the more humane areas. And now we're seeing things like, no, we really don't want to keep doing that, because we're just doing, we're not receiving, right? So it's very interesting paradox. We'll see more of that. So interdependence, regardless of this paradox, this lull that we're going through historically right now, forces us to acknowledge, even if we don't like the other, interdependence forces us to acknowledge the humanity in the other. And it forces us to see the idea that just like I suffer and I have pain, all of us suffer. All of us have pain. And we're all interdependent on each other to feel better, to grow as a species. Environmental problems that we face are another example where if we don't do anything, we're all going to, right? The crisis with the oceans full of plastics. So it's not about the oceans having plastic, and I don't live by the ocean, but I have to stop using plastic. Not just me, all of us, and so on and so forth. Another one, as I mentioned before, the whole idea of terrorism that we're facing. Is it religious born? Or is it a unequal balance of power, etc.? And how do we feel about that? I feel quite disturbed myself, because it's such an interesting idea of our globe, our planet, going to this zero-sumness type of environment. But again, it's not enough. It's not enough. We have to go beyond that reciprocal altruism to a state of true altruism, a state of the universal compassion. How can we do that? We can do that by expanding something very interesting that we call moral imagination. Our moral imagination is a sense of empathy. It's a sense of, especially a sense of feeling your pain, not sympathy, empathy. I know you're going through something. I feel your pain. I'm right there with you. And stop labeling, all of those who are suffering because I feel their pain, not as the other, not as my enemy, right? And it's quite hard to do that, to expand this moral imagination, especially in a place that doesn't feel natural. So we're talking earlier about somebody burning my flag and hurting my sense of pride, right? That person does not feel like somebody that I know. Behaviors are not, it don't mimic my own behavior, my own sense of respect. That person does not look like me, does not talk like me, speak like me, so on and so forth. So that moral imagination expansion is much, much harder when the other is really foreign to me. And the question that we pose ourselves here, is it worth for us to feel compassionate to that level of other that we so clearly feel made something wrong, deserves to go to the prison, metaphorically speaking? And let us not forget now that the best tool for us to go into this exercise to become better, to reach that universal compassion, is the idea that religion can harness our emotional center, and religion, and I'm talking about religion as a link to the divine, whatever that divine may be. Linking ourselves to the divine can harness our emotional center and truly invite us to that expansion of our moral imagination and live in a world, in a new paradigm where I can feel empathy, therefore I can be compassionate. How do we expand our circle of compassion? So I need to read somebody quite smart, Albert Einstein. So his words are, and I would like for you to really pay attention. It's really interesting sentence here. A human being is a part of the whole, called by us universe. A part limited in time and space. He, human being, he experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest. A kind of optical delusion of his consciousness, a separation. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and affliction. And the affection for a few persons only closest and nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures in the whole of nature in its beauty. Isn't it wonderful? And Albert Einstein talks about compassion. Let us now quickly define what is compassion. We've been talking for about 20 minutes. Compassion is, simply put, sensitivity to another's suffering and the corresponding, this is important, the corresponding will to free the other from that suffering. So if I have no empathy, can I do that? I must have empathy for your suffering to be able to see your suffering and be able to free you from that suffering. The problem in today's society is that our suffering is not very outward, is it? We mask our own pain points. We mask our suffering very well. We become really good at it, in fact. But anyways, the other side of a definition from a compassion perspective is actually the definition of what love is. And love is simply the will for the other to be happy. So my love, this is really broadly put, of course, my love for you is expressed with my idea that I want you to be happy, to feel happiness, to share that feeling, which is the opposite of self-centeredness, self-selfishness, and that second level of compassion, which is So those who are caught in this circle of self-concern suffer endlessly, while those who are compassionate are actually free and implicitly more happy than the others. So my invitation for everyone is, let's be compassionate at whatever level we are, our family, the others, so we can be treated like we treat them, or universally so. And with that, I would like to give some tips on how we can be compassionate, okay? The first one is to visualize everybody as one. We're all one. We're all here as one human race, and to do that we have to really understand that we have different types of feelings to different types of people. So we talked about the enemy. I use that word quite a lot just because of some of Jesus' passages, right? Love thy enemy. But let's think about enemy as the other, the one that we don't know, and or those that we have a negative feeling. Negative feeling can be a thought, a nagging thought, jealousy, the one that we know gossip about us and we are not so happy, whatever that may be, that's the other. And what we want to, when we visualize all of us as one, we need to first and foremost start to moving away all of our negative feelings to those, whoever those are, into the second level, which is a neutral feeling. And the neutral is simply, I don't care. But can I be compassionate if I don't care? No, we're just moving, right? And finally, when we move away from the enemy to the neutral to our friend, those we care, we're now moving to the realm of the ability to be compassionate, because as we are gravitating that area, now we are compassionate, but we are responsible and committed to their happiness, to their well-being, hence our love to them. Second tip, we can visualize, this is a cute one, we can visualize everyone as if they were our child. So we're their mothers. it's easy for us because we're here studying Spiritism. So we know that we probably were, right? In our web of past lives, somehow, somewhere, we're all interrelated anyways. And we could have been, in fact, your mother, or you, male or female, can be our mother. So it's a very interesting tip to see. Let's visualize that who we can't, that we are not feeling so good, but that person is a mother. Therefore, we can look at and project our feelings of goodness. In fact, if we look into some of other religions, and we talk about Buddhism, we hear Buddhism calling the Eternal Mother in some of the text. In Christianity, aren't we all God's children, right? So it's very interesting because it permeates in many texts the idea of relationship of parent-child. So we can do that. We can use that to make us closer to the other. Number 3 is a simple and a great tool. In fact, there are research today that talk about the effects of being grateful. Right? I don't know if you read any of the latest research, but if you write every day 1 to 5 things that you're grateful every day, and grateful can be, oh, I can breathe, right? I was sick for 10 days now, and today is the first day I have not had to take any medicine, so I can breathe, I'm grateful. Just write it down. There is a correlation to health and well-being in being grateful. So be grateful for everything that we have received, that we have. This body, this life, this opportunity to be here and share this time with you, so on and so forth. Number 4 is what we call lovely love or universal compassion. And it's and I can better explain with an example, right? Which is when the other is loved and they're happy, they're satisfied, everything works. Lovely love. What am I talking about? Well, let's talk about a lion. Have you ever seen a lion after it has hunted and eaten? They're like little kittens sleeping. They're most beautiful creatures out there, aren't they? We can do the same for another creature that people abhor, a snake. If a snake is not afraid or hungry, there's absolutely nothing to fear. It has nothing there for you to be afraid. And so when we look at this, we start to see if all of us were indeed loved, happy, satisfied, we would not be striking. So the tip is, let's all have a lovely love in our daily lives, and as we become very lovely, loving creatures, we start to be able to exert universal compassion. But the problem with compassion is that it's linked to action, right? So if we feel something, and that something can be ourselves, like a unlove, if you feel, you must act. Feeling must be your motivation, hence empathy, going back to empathy. And feeling is also the driver, but input for your choice to act. And beyond universal compassion, if we think about the interdependence of all of us, then we need to start thinking about and acting on the suffering, whatever that may be, including ourselves. And that leads finally to the idea of universal responsibility. So if we think in terms of religions of the world, and I try to talk about, bring here tidbits from other religions, but we think about religions of the world, the common language of the religion of humanity is kindness. Right? It's kindness. You see in many different texts, kindness. So that kindness is linked to this universal responsibility for the well-being of the other. Whatever happens to the other will happen to me. I am responsible for everybody's well-being. And that then leaves us to a whole new orientation where we realize that my happiness is completely linked to your happiness, to your well-being. So let us close with the idea that God is known by some as the compassionate one. And I love that. God is the compassionate one. And why is God the compassionate one? Because of its infinite source of justice and compassion. Justice and compassion. So the question here, and that's my closing, is how can we practice the art of being? In our goal to find the kingdom heaven inside of us, we can never forget what? The divine laws are written in our own conscience, and it is up to us to learn to interpret those laws inside of us. It is at this point that we have to understand that behind every action, there is a motive. Right? Every action, there's a motive. Let us see that this motive can lead us to the essence of what we really are. And when we are what we really are, as reflection of the divine laws inside of us, we're practicing the art of being. Any questions? Thank you.